When you download the Kroger app, you have easy access to savings every day. Shop weekly sales and get personalized coupons to get the most value out of every trip, every time, whether you shop in-store or online. Download the Kroger app now to save big. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Must have a digital account to redeem offers. Restrictions may apply. See site for details.
Save big on your favorites with the Buy 5 or More, Save $1 each sale. Simply buy 5 or more participating items and save $1 each with your card. Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Hello and welcome to this very special bonus episode of Real Life Ghost Stories. So here's the thing. A little while ago, Chris from They're Not Shadows podcast contacted me and he was like, hey, would it be helpful if we did a bonus episode where we showcase different podcasts and got different people to submit stories from their podcasts and we can all put it on our feeds and then we can get more listeners and all of that jazz? And I was like, absolutely. That sounds like something I would absolutely want to be a part of. So in this episode, you are going to hear a collection of stories from different podcasts. You've got They're Not Shadows, The Ghost Story Guys, It's Haunted What Now? We Need to Talk About Ghosts, Weekly Creep, You Can See Me in the Dark, Haunted Happenstance, and Southern Gothic. So hopefully by listening to this episode, you might find some new favourites. I've left the Real Life Ghost Stories episode until the very end of the podcast. It's one that you've heard before. I used the story of the Connecticut dolls. So you might want to re-listen, or you might be like, oh no, I've heard that before. I don't want to hear it again. So I'll leave it until the very end and you can make that decision when you get there. And if you hear a podcast that you like and you think, oh, I want to check that out, please do go and check them out. When you are a genuine indie podcaster, it is hard to find listeners and it is so important to have a good community of other podcasters around you that are trying to encourage people to listen to you too and trying to showcase your work. And a massive thank you to Chris from They're Not Shadows for organising this, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey, this is Nate.
And this is Melissa. And this is You Can See Me in the Dark, a podcast about true ghost stories directly from the people who experience them.
We have new stories out monthly with bonus content on our Patreon if you can't get enough. And we got a killer theme song.
I'm Melissa Sweezy.
And I'm Nate Reisman, and this is You Can See Me in the Dark.
You can see me in the dark. In our most recent episode, Noah tells a terrifying story about growing up in the most haunted house in Bristol, England. This story is about what happened after he left. You Can See Me in the Dark presents Noah.
I worked at a care home for old folks for a while, and it was a very old building. Like, it used to be a workhouse, a Victorian workhouse, and that place was really haunted. Like, oof, I didn't like it there. I really didn't like it there. There was a corridor in the like main building of the care home, and as soon as you walked through, there was like a security door, because the residents had dementia, so they would have doors so they couldn't just walk out, for safety. As soon as you walked through the door, stood in that like corridor, it was just this like horrible sensation just washes over you, and everything feels heavy. It's like almost like a pressure pressing down on you, and I hated being in that corridor. And they had a vicar come to like bless this corridor, and he had come and hung a like little wooden cross on the wall after he blessed it. And every now and then, for no reason at all, the cross would be turned upside down, or it would fall and just be on the floor. And certain members of staff refused to go in that corridor. They just would not go in there. ever. And this corridor, there were like eight bedrooms off of this corridor. And the residents had these like pressure sensitive mats next to their bed. So if they got out of bed, it would set an alarm off and we would know they'd got out of bed. So then we could go and see to them. And sometimes when I worked night shift, me and the other staff would be sat like drinking coffee, trying to stay awake. And all of a sudden, every single alarm for every room in that corridor would all go off all at the same time. And the first time it happened, I was like, come on, we've got to get up, everyone's awake. And one of the other staff was like, no, they're not. They're not awake. And I was like, what are you talking about? They're not. All of the alarms are going off. We need to go up there. And she's like, they're not awake. You can go up and look, but I can bet you they're all still in bed. And I was like, all right then. So I went up by myself in the dark, turning all the lights on as I went because I was scared, because I hated that hallway. And I go into the hallway, open the first door. No, residents in bed fast asleep. Turn the alarm off. Open the next door. Residents in bed fast asleep. Turn the alarm off. And the whole time it's like beep, beep, beep. And I'm going door after door after door after door. Everyone is asleep in bed. And I'm thinking, how are all of these alarms being set off? Like, what is setting these alarms off? But after that, like, it just was kind of like a known thing. Like, yeah, that happens. That happens all the time, you know. There's no need to rush because nobody knows what it is, but something is just messing with us, I guess. But that corridor, another time I was putting laundry away. I used to take laundry and take it to the wardrobes in each room. And I stopped in the end room and like I had these huge buckets or baskets of clothes, dry clothes. I leave it in the first room and then I go to the next room. I like grab stuff and I go into the next room. And then I hear this almighty crash and I'm thinking, what in the hell? What was that? It sounds like someone's trashing the room next door. And I'm thinking, but there's no one there. And I go out into the next room and I open the door and someone has grabbed these 2 baskets of laundry and just thrown clothes everywhere. And just all over the room. And I'm like, what the hell? What did that? There's no one here. Like, there's no residents, there's no staff members. Like, what the hell is going on? And I'm like grabbing all the clothes and folding them and putting them back in the basket. And while I'm doing that, I hear another sound in the room I just came from. And I'm like, someone is pranking me. Like, someone is absolutely pranking me right now. So I pull the door open, I go really quietly and I creep out. I go to the door and I just swing the door open. And the clothes that I'd just taken into that room have been thrown everywhere. And I just stand there and look at it and I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, there's no one here. I'm on my own. Something is messing with me and I don't know what it is, but it's definitely screwing with me now. So I grabbed the clothes and stuffed them in the basket and I took the baskets and I left and went back down to the laundry room. I was like, I'm not doing this now. Like, this is too weird. I know that other weird things had happened to other staff members. Nobody said anything about that happening to them specifically, but I know other times that staff members had gone into a room and they'd heard a noise in the next room, and when they'd gone in there, someone had opened the wardrobe and everything was on the floor. So like, whoever or whatever was there liked making a mess. And seemed to enjoy watching, because it would be like it would trick you to go into the other room, and while you're in that room it would do something in the room you'd just been in. Like, yeah, it was kind of like it was pranking. It made me uncomfortable, I will say. I felt afraid, but it was almost like I could imagine someone being like, hee hee, this is so funny. Like, they're going to go and look in the other room now, and while they're in there, I'm going to mess around in the other room. Very strange. But there was one story that kind of circulated amongst the staff. It was kind of like the most popular, I guess, ghost story. And it was a couple of years back when this hallway with the horrible sensation was actually like a newly converted part of the building. And when it had been converted, and decorators had come in to like paint it and prepare it so it could be used, and there's two guys up there working, and one of them comes down to the like main office and it's like, I can't work up here with all these children running around. They're knocking things over, they're getting in the way, like this is dangerous, there shouldn't be kids here right now. And the receptionist looks at him, she's like, what are you talking about? Like, there are no kids here. And he's like, no, I just saw there's like 2 or 3 kids up there and they're running around and they're just making so much noise, like we're trying to work here. And she's like, I really don't know why you're saying that because there are no kids here. This is an old folks home, there are no kids. And he was like, oh, okay. And then the next day, these 2 guys were supposed to come back and continue their work. They didn't come back. I don't know. I've heard that the building, like, it was a workhouse. So it's possible that the children were sent there and possibly died there, possibly. I know the building, there was like a sort of outside building that wasn't connected to the main building, where the like laundry room was. And I know that they would sleep there. And sometimes late in the evening, you would hear coughing coming from somewhere. I would be there on my own, like getting clean laundry, and I would hear someone like really coughing, like, oh my God, if they got pneumonia or something. But there's no one there. Yeah. It's a really spooky place. I think it was the clothes getting thrown around the room was the last straw for me, because it was kind of like, not only is this scary, but it's making more work for me. Because we were stretched quite thin a lot of the time and there wasn't time to deal with these kind of mishaps. Yeah, and also I really didn't like being in that corridor at night. I did not feel safe in that corridor, and like I'm not religious, but walking into that corridor at like 1 o'clock in the morning and seeing the cross lying on the floor is a really unsettling feeling. I imagine for anyone, whether they're religious or not, just seeing that and being like, this feels threatening. I'm glad I left.
Hi, I'm Chris, the host of They're Not Shadows, a paranormal story podcast. This story is titled The Old Farm. I'm an engineer, and I don't believe in ghosts. I'm convinced they couldn't exist due to several laws of physics. Yet, something happened that I can't explain. My brother told me he'd been to an abandoned farmhouse with his partner and had an experience. As they were standing inside this very old house, she asked him,
"Do you really think this place is haunted?"
And before he could reply, he said the house shook.
Oh my God! What's happening?
I don't know.
I didn't think he was lying, but I was concerned he was delusional. So I decided to check out this farmhouse for myself. I was with a former colleague, a guy with a PhD in physics, who also does not believe in ghosts. It was a bright sunny day. And as we arrived, we could hear the wind, the nearby sheep, and the birds chirping. But as we approached the house, it all stopped. It was so sudden and obvious, we both commented.
Did you notice how...
Yeah, I did.
We kept going, and out of an adjacent, open-sided barn, a flock of crows flew out, as if they were disturbed by something. It was like a cliché scene from a horror movie.
That was weird.
Yeah, weird.
We got to the house. It appeared to have been abandoned for at least half a century. What furniture remained was very old, from around the Second World War. And there was a strong smell of dampness and mould. We explored the upstairs rooms.
Hey, look at this. A newspaper from the 50s. The reopening of the Suez Canal.
1957?
Spot on. March 29th, to be precise.
We came back down and systematically went through every downstairs room. Then, from the empty room that we'd both just been in, we heard something. It was unmistakably the sound of a foot scuffing the floor. We looked at each other. Without a word, we both turned and looked at the open doorway. Then, from it came... There was no furniture in that room. There simply wasn't anywhere anyone could have been hiding in there. It was an empty room.
Should we?
Yeah, we should.
You can make of it what you will. We don't know what to make of it.
Hey there, I'm Jennifer, and I host Haunted Happenstance, a creepy and quirky little audio drama set in a historic residence in Boston, Massachusetts. You see, I've always loved a good ghost story, and as it turns out, ghosts have always loved me too. Convenient? Maybe. Coincidence? Perhaps. But I think it's a bit more than that. Let's see if you agree. So sit back and get ready to join me, and my neighbors, for some truly spooky tales that can only be explained as Haunted Happenstance. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you find your podcasts. I stared at the clock on my bedside. It was 11:56 p.m. on Monday, September 30th, 2019, 4 minutes away from October the 1st. Sure, I was looking forward to the month, even more so for real fall to hopefully creep in, but I was not looking forward to what else I knew would be creeping in at exactly midnight. I stared out into the all but black space that was our lofted condo, the slightest sliver of hazy light slipping in under the front door from the perma-lit brick hallway, and I just clicked my tongue lightly, almost mimicking a countdown ticker. At least this year I had a plan. I was pretty certain it wouldn't last the whole month, but any day that it did work was one more day and night that I could breathe a little easier and, heaven forbid, actually enjoy my favorite month for once. Although I couldn't see it in the dark, I knew that just out of reach was a small tote bag, complete with a few basic necessities and a few extra things that hopefully wouldn't be necessary at all, short of a horrific emergency, but better safe than sorry. 11:59. Perfect. So close. I held my breath in anticipation and watched as the numbers flicked over to 12 o'clock. I exhaled and tried to slip my legs out of bed without disrupting either of the snoozers. Luckily, John could sleep through the apocalypse, and Sophie was pretty much deaf, at least when it suited her. I reached down in the dark and let my fingers slip through the handles of the pre-packed bag and turned to my side. I waved to the dirty blonde boy in his late teens, his dirt-smeared light green t-shirt and lightly torn dungarees, the same as they always were. I tilted my head towards the kitchen, beckoning him to follow me, and he did, without sound or question. I turned our front doorknob as slowly as possible and opened it just enough so I could slip out into the hall without the hinges breaking their creaking halfway point. Holding onto the external handle, I let the door slide naturally back into the threshold and then turned to the boy. In the bright lights of the hall, the smallest trickle of dried blood could be seen emerging from the part in his crumpled hair. He wore only one shoe, a muddy red original low-top Chuck Taylor, his right foot bare, filthy and scratched. Thankfully, we didn't have to go far, and even more thankfully, I was pretty sure he couldn't feel anything anyway. I motioned for him to follow me, I adjusted the bag on my shoulder, and we headed down the 4th floor hall in the direction of the back elevator. Stopping short a few doors of it, I looked at him with the warmest smile I had in my repertoire, made sure my eyes were light and genuine, and finally spoke. "Don't worry, you'll be okay, I promise." He nodded and stood more primly. I cleared my throat and straightened my own posture to mirror his, and I knocked my fist solidly against one of my neighbor's doors. When no sound or movement came from the other side, I brought my knuckles back together and this time knocked with a more pleasant cadence. Some shuffling and stumbling was immediately audible, along with a mumbled curse or two, and within a moment, the door opened slowly, uncertainly, and revealed a half-asleep, middle-aged man, my neighbor, Benjamin. I think it was safe to say that seeing me outside his door at midnight was perplexing to him, but nowhere near as disorienting as when his eyes fell to my companion. I sighed a little, figuratively and literally. "Oh, good, you can see him. Hey, sorry to bother you so late, Ben, but you kept saying at the loft's last block party that you thought it was so cool that ghosts visited me, and you wish that they'd visit you too. Well, you're in luck. This fine young man right here needs somewhere to stay for the month, And unfortunately, I just don't have the space for him this year. Benjamin tore his eyes off of me as I spoke and stared instead to the lad to my side, half in amazement, half in terror. I figured I gotta wrap things up quickly, lest he wake up enough to scream, or worse, tell me and my friend to beat it. I handed over the bag that I carried. Here's everything you should need to get through, and if you have any questions, just text, okay? Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. At that, I ducked backwards a few steps and headed back home. I tiptoed back into our condo and snuck into bed, impressed that I'd completed the delivery in less than 7 minutes flat. Feeling hopeful, a little nervous, but mostly tired, I sighed heavily as I wiggled deeper into my pillow. John rolled over, eyes still half closed, and asked if everything was okay. I nodded. Yeah, it's all good. Go back to sleep, baby doll. He looked at the clock and asked through a yawn, "Where's Christian?" as he settled his head back down. I brought him to Benjamin's for the month. I think it's a good match. Even in the darkness, I could tell that John had brought a hand up and over his eyes. Jen, you can't just loan people ghosts. He was poking fun at you when he said he wanted to see them too. I shrugged my shoulders, rolled onto my side, and as I fell into a happy, relieved, and slightly less haunted sleep, I mumbled, "Well, I guess the joke's on him this time."
Hey y'all, I'm Brandon Scheck-Snyder from the podcast Southern Gothic. I've got a little story for you from out in West Virginia. Back in the early 19th century, before coal became king and West Virginia was even a state, most folks who came out to this neck of the woods were homesteaders, self-reliant settlers looking to own a piece of land, farm it, and make a life for themselves without all the trappings of city life. So men like Berg Hammond helped them. Hammond was a peddler, a traveling salesman who meandered his way through the region in a wagon filled with items that you otherwise couldn't find unless you took the long journey into town. He sold all sorts of things from clothing to kitchenware, household goods, and even toys. And to folks he sold to, the arrival of his horse-drawn wagon was a welcome sight for sore eyes. The Encyclopedia of West Virginia quotes a woman who grew up in a rural county during the 1880s as saying that visits from peddlers like Berg, quote, gave us something to look forward to. It was almost like having Santa Claus come. We loved to see the big bundle opened up, for we seldom saw new things. But Berg was a little different than some of his peers, because not only did he bring all sorts of traditional wares, but he also carried with him a number of musical instruments, all of which he knew how to play. And for this reason, he didn't really think of himself as a peddler the way his customers did. He believed he was a creative, a musician, out on the road, entertaining folks everywhere he went. But of all the instruments he carried and played, the one that gave him the biggest draw was the fiddle. This, of course, made the sight of Berg coming into a town an even bigger treat than most. He was always received with the utmost excitement and got numerous invitations to stay the night at a local farmer's house, have a hot meal, and a soft bed. But as you can imagine, life on the road out there wasn't easy. Communities were few and far between, and it would sometimes take Berg days to travel between them, on seldom used dirt roads winding through the treacherous mountains of Appalachia. And this was all in a heavy wagon pulled by a couple of old horses. This was a lonely life, and it's no wonder why Berg picked up the fiddle. Unfortunately, after years of making his way through these mountains, the fiddler's good fortune came to an end. According to local lore, one evening Berg was caught out in the rain while traveling along the winding roads of Bud Mountain. Their way over the peak, he might find a dry place to stop and spend the night. He pressed on. But as the sun began to fade, a deep fog set in, and the path became more and more dangerous as rain fell harder and harder. Berg had no light to guide him, and although he had traveled these roads many times over the years, he soon found that he had somehow drifted off the worn path. It was then, amidst the confusion and darkness, that his horses got spooked. They reared up in terror with fear-filled neighs as Berg attempted to regain control of his wagon. But after sliding backward, it began to tumble down the steep side of Bud Mountain. It took quite a bit of time before folks realized that their favorite fiddle-playing peddler was missing. And it took even longer for them to find him. And when they finally did, they discovered what they had feared. Berg and his horses had met their fate on that stormy night. Yet in spite of his death, old Berg Hammond wasn't done sawing on that fiddle, and it wasn't long till people started to notice. Folks who knew him claimed to hear those familiar melodies echoing through the air on stormy nights. And to this very day, locals claim that he'll even play for you on demand if you just go ahead and ask. Berg Hammond, let's hear some of those pretty tunes.
When you download the Kroger app, you have easy access to savings every day. Shop weekly sales and get personalized coupons to get the most value out of every trip, every time, whether you shop in-store or online. Download the Kroger app now to save big. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Must have a digital account to redeem offers. Restrictions may apply. See site for details.
Save big on your favorites with the Buy 5 or More Save $1 each sale. Simply buy 5 or more participating items and save $1 each with your card. Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Welcome, new listeners, to It's Haunted, What Now? The podcast where I, Lainey Hobbs, share bone-chilling tales of haunted objects and the unsuspecting individuals who cross paths with them. Join me as we unravel the mysteries and supernatural encounters that unfold when these eerie artifacts make their way into our lives. Visit hauntedpod.com to learn more, submit your own spooky tale to be featured on the show, and connect with our ever-growing community of paranormal enthusiasts. Follow me at It's Haunted What Now on Instagram for behind-the-scenes glimpses and join the conversation. As a co-founder of the True Crime and Paranormal Podcast Festival, I'm dedicated to bringing you captivating stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Our next story comes from Mason Ridgway, who brings us multiple experiences from a friend of hers who seems to be linked to the supernatural in ways she can't control. I've been working with a girl that has quickly become a friend. She's opened up about some of the crazy stuff she's experienced, and I've been there to witness a few of them. After hearing her stories, I'm insanely curious about what it all means. I'll relay some of her stories the best that I can remember. One day, I came into work and she opened up to me about her weekend working alone at the office. For context, our office has a basement with a door that opens to the outside. She started by telling me that her friend came to visit. Her friend dropped some food off and they chatted for a while about the day. In the middle of their conversation, she heard the keypad being entered for the front door, which then proceeded to swing open. Both of them were confused, so she hopped up from her desk to see who was there. And no one was. No extra cars outside the door, no people, nothing. She shut the door and sat down to continue her conversation with her friend. The door swung open a second time, and just as before, no one was there. She closed the door again, and this time, she locked it. She told me that she was spooked at this point, but felt like it was a fluke. And then she heard the keypad being pressed again. The door swung open, and no one was there. Her friend left, and I can't say that I blame her, but apparently nothing happened after that, and the door remained firmly shut. The next incident I was involved in. Honestly, I was so spooked by it, it's what brought me to tell this story in the first place. Our boss was having a meeting and get-together throughout the entire day in our basement office. Near the end, my friend and I decided to join in and hang out with everyone. With it being a bit of a celebration of the end of things, we felt like we deserved to relax a little bit. We were working on a set of vision boards when suddenly the basement door slammed open, startling everyone in the room. Within seconds, the door leading upstairs to the first floor also slammed closed. I felt like I jumped out of my skin, but no one else seemed to budge. If anything, they seemed annoyed. The door at the top of the stairs then continued to slam closed 3 more times, randomly and aggressively without anyone being anywhere near it. I was completely spooked, but tried to play it off as a joke, asking my friend what the hell she'd brought into the office. A few weeks prior to this, she told me that she'd seen a lot of weird phenomena, but nothing that she'd thought there was anything to be alarmed about. She told me about the house she'd been staying in with her parents. Lights would flicker and blow out to the point where her parents asked her what was going on since they'd never had that happen before she came to stay. She'd had to replace them repeatedly with no explanation. Most importantly, she told me that she's seen ghosts. The first one she told me about was a man she'd seen frequently around her house. He wore a blue plaid shirt, and the first time she saw him, he was sitting at the foot of her bed. She'd woken up around 3 a.m. to see him sitting there. She tried to ignore him, to cover her head with a blanket, but when she opened her eyes again, he was still there. She told me she'd ended up kicking the blankets, and that's when he'd stood up and disappeared into nothingness. I asked if anyone else in her family had seen him, and she said her son had. He had described the exact same outfit and had told her that he was a good guy and that he wasn't scared. And that might be all right for him, but this last story is the one that scares me the most. My friend told me she'd been driving with a friend when she was in high school, going along a backcountry road. They came across a woman standing in the middle of the street wearing old-fashioned all-black clothes. She told me that the woman had levitated off the pavement, floated towards the woods that flanked each side of the road, and then disappeared. She and her friend were both in shock, stopped in the middle of the street, staring in pure fear and silence before getting the hell out of there. Like I say, there are too many stories around her to be able to tell them all. My main question is, what would cause this amount of activity around her? She says she's had this happen her whole life and has no idea why. I think she deserves some answers. So it definitely sounds like your friend has some sort of link to the paranormal that most of the rest of us don't share. I kind of want to say she's haunted or she's, in tune with the other side some way. It's definitely strange that she's experienced so many incidents in her life, and especially for them to be so seemingly unrelated, except for the fact that they're all happening to her or around her. Definitely something to look into if she can, and maybe she can go to at least in Dallas, we have psychic fairs, and so maybe she can find one local to her area and go and talk to any mediums that are out there who would be able to help her determine if she has that gift and how to manage it. Until next time.
Did you hear that?
Hey, I'm Brendan Storr.
I'm Paul Bestel.
And we're the Ghost Story Guys.
This story comes from our episode, The Mystery of Missing Time. It's called Orange Light. My parents live in a large house in Pennsylvania that backs up to a large wooded area and one house that sits a bit farther back than ours into the woods. The downstairs is probably 2,500 to 3,000 square feet, and there are numerous big windows, including bay windows in the living room above the blinds that look out into the woods. This probably happened about 9 years ago. My sister was around 11 or 12, and I was about 20. I was watching her a couple nights while my parents were out of town. It's worth noting that my parents never went away, so I do find it odd that it happened the one time they did. It wasn't too late at night, maybe around 11, and we were sitting with every light off downstairs, specifically watching lightning bugs out those big bay windows and just talking. All of a sudden, there was a huge burst of orange light with no sound that filled up the entire downstairs like someone had turned the lights on, but even brighter than normal. It was almost a deep orange, and my first reaction was that our house or the neighbor's house behind us had caught on fire. We both got up to run outside, and that's the last memory I have of that evening. I know we woke up the next day as normal, went to my old high school's basketball game and had people over after. There was absolutely no discussion about the night before. Fast forward to about 2 years ago. My sister, who was now about 18, and I were sitting around the kitchen center island talking. All of a sudden, I got a burst of memories from that night, but only what I just mentioned above. I blurted out to my sister, "Wait, what happened that night with the orange light?" And she immediately knew what I was talking about. Turns out she had had a memory just the night before that she didn't connect until that moment. Here we had 7 years since this incident, where we both never said a word to each other, and then we both suddenly had memories within the same 24 hours. It's worth saying that my sister can be oddly psychic and just aware of things that are completely foreign or unknown to others. She also reported seeing things in our house as a kid. Her vision, or dream, from the night before was of us running out the back door, which we ran out of that evening, and there being a large green glowing orb on the driveway. That's where her vision ends. It wasn't until I brought up the orange light that it clicked in her head that was that night. I guess she was viewing it as just a dream before, but in that moment she realized it was actually a memory. What's especially weird about all this is that my sister and I are very interested in the paranormal, especially things which are space-related, and there is absolutely no way we would have just walked back in after that odd experience and gotten in bed without any discussion. I know we would have offered many theories, as we have now, instead of just ignoring it and getting in our separate beds. What's also weird is that my sister and I both never go to bed before midnight 1 a.m., and if I'm home, we usually sleep in the same bed, falling asleep watching a movie or something. Given where we woke up the next morning, I know for sure that we went to our own beds that night. I've tried to rationalize what happened, like thinking about headlights turning around in the further house's driveway, but they don't match the lights at all. I mean, this was like nuclear explosion bright, lighting the entire downstairs a deep, deep orange. However, even more than that, I'm weirded out by our completely uncharacteristic reaction to what happened. The reason I chose that particular story out of our archive is I have had my own green light experience, and I don't know that I would say it's specifically UFO related, but it was unusual and I don't have an explanation for it. If you'd like to know more about that, come check out me and Paul over on the Ghost Story Guys podcast, or check out my book, A Strange Little Place, The Paranormal Secrets of Revelstoke, British Columbia.
Hey, we're Weekly Creep. I'm Adam.
I'm Dulce.
And Weekly Creep is a show where we delve deep into all of the craziness from the paranormal world and beyond, and also sometimes true crime.
And other stuff we just delve into because we think it's really interesting and we just want to share it with you.
Yeah.
For example, I have a story. I wish I could tell you this was an extraordinary night. Something special happened. I saw my cat do a backflip, but it was nothing of the sort. It was a very ordinary night. I woke up in the middle of the night, 2 steps, heels specifically, walking down from the living room into the hallway, which was in my view. And at my feet, I see Porkchop looking in the same direction, alert, focused. Like I don't ever remember seeing her, unless she's looking at some sort of bottle cap or a spider, but it was none of that. After I heard these heels, a memory came to mind. Back a few years ago, my sister used to live in the same house. And in her 20s, in her heyday, she would dress up to the nines and she'd go out. And that's the only time that I'd ever remember hearing heels like that rapidly walking around the house. It sounded like it was 2015 and she had forgotten something. She ran back into the house to grab whatever lipstick or perfume she had forgotten before heading out into the night with her friends. But then I remembered it was 2023. So here I am in bed, alert, terrified, because it was those very steps that woke me and I knew it wasn't a dream. So I turn over and I shove at him because he was dead asleep. And I tell him, someone's in the house. And he turns over, voice is just full of sleep. And he said, go back to sleep. You're dreaming. And I completely disregard his comment because I know I'm not crazy. And that wasn't a dream. After I figured he'd be completely useless and of no help at all, I decided that I'm going to put on my big girl panties. And if I find someone in the house, I'm going to scream at the top of my lungs and alert everyone in the house. So I get out of the bed and I check every room and I find nothing and no one out of the ordinary. Relieved, I get back into bed and I'm about to fall asleep until I look down and I see Porkchop still focused in the hallway where I had once heard those steps.
I decided I didn't want to tell one of my own personal stories, rather one of my family members' stories. And the reason why is because this one has stuck out to me for years and years, and I've never heard anything quite like it. So, I'm asking you all, if you have ever heard anything like this, to reach out to me, Weekly Creep, on Instagram, and let me know what you think. Way back in the day, sometime in the early 60s, my grandmother and her sister-in-law are walking back to my grandfather's family home. As they get into the neighborhood, they can see the house not even 100 meters away from them, so they decide to cross the road. But as soon as they put their foot on the street, the house is on fire, or at least the huge bush directly outside the house catches fire instantaneously. Terrified, they jump back on the sidewalk. Now, at this point, they're thinking, oh my God, the whole house is burning down. But as soon as they stand back on the path, the flames are gone. The house is untouched. They do it again. The flames erupt as if someone's just poured a load of petrol on the bush and the house itself. This goes on for an unknown amount of time. My grandmother says it could have been 5 minutes, an hour. She literally lost track of all time. But eventually it stops and they're able to go to the house. They tell everybody about it, and kind of the way a lot of ghost stories go, I'm calling this a ghost story because what else do you call it? It kind of just gets forgotten about, not talked about anymore. Until a few months later, my grandfather finds out that his older brother, who had lived in England at the time, had passed away in a house fire. This event had happened months previously, but because there was no telephones or even any family ties really back then, like once you went to England or America or wherever, for a lot of people, that was it. So by the time the family actually found out, he was already long buried in a cemetery in England. So like I said, I'm not really sure what this story is. I call it a ghost story because I genuinely don't know what else to call it. But if you have experienced or even heard of anybody else who has experienced something like this, please reach out, let me know. I'm so curious about this. Like I said, you can find Weekly Creep on Instagram to message us directly. If you want to listen to us, check us out on all of the podcast places. Weekly Creep everywhere.
Hello listeners, my name's Kev and I'm the host of We Need to Talk About Ghosts. You can see what I've done there. It's meant to be We Need to Talk About Kevin. I've removed the word Kevin and added ghosts, because that's the sort of humour and wit you can expect. Yes, very low. Anyway, if you're into the paranormal, as you clearly are because you're listening to this show, head over to wherever you get your podcast from and search We Need to Talk About Ghosts. And hopefully you'll like it. You might not, and that's fine too, because we're all just living on a spinning crazy rock. Anyway, each week we read out some of our true listener ghost stories, we review something paranormal, doesn't matter what it is, could be an egg, if it was a paranormal egg, and then we delve into the depths of Reddit to hear about spooky stuff going on over there. So if you like it, go check us out, search wherever you get your podcasts, We Need to Talk About Ghosts. Tatty bye. My name's Kev from We Need to Talk About Ghosts, and I'm going to regale to you some of the paranormal experiences experienced by my mother. Now, she sadly passed on whilst I was quite young, but she is the reason why I have an interest in the paranormal. She was a believer herself, and she experienced quite a few things. Some of those things I'm going to tell you now. So the first one that jumps out is when she was a teenager, she was babysitting her nieces and nephews, and they didn't really come from a well-off area, so when she was babysitting them, they'd all be in the same bed, and she recalls falling asleep one night, but waking up because she could hear one of the children giggling and mumbling, and when she turned around, the child was sat up in bed, staring at a rocking chair which was in the corner, and smiling and nodding and laughing with its eyes closed, thank you very much, and the chair then started to rock. At which point, me mum picked all the kids up, ran downstairs, phoned her uncle, who came over with his Alsatian or German Shepherd, you know, the type of dog I mean, not afraid of anything. And he comes through the door, he marches upstairs with the dog dug its claws in at the line of the bedroom. So where that metal strip is, which separates the carpet, it wouldn't go any further and it was whimpering. Now, this was the late 60s, and let's just say that animals weren't treated with the same dignity that we treat them today. So he picks up the animal by its fur and throws it into the room, as if to say, what are you scared about? The dog then yelps like it's being kicked, runs past my uncle down the stairs, out through the front door, and is found 2 miles away, completely knackered, completely breathless. It's not stopped running since whatever it encountered in that room. And apparently as the dog ran past my mother's uncle, he turned and watched with his own eyes as the rocking chair continued to rock and then come to a stop. So, what was in that room? We'll literally never know. A second tale that she told me was when she was buying shoes for her sister's wedding, and my mother's mother died when my mother was about 2 years old. So she was brought up by her elder sisters. So she never really met her mother in true terms. She had no recollection of her. Anyway, she goes to a shoe shop in Liverpool city centre. And it's a quiet morning. She gets up pretty early. She's in the shop for bang on 9 o'clock. It's the middle of the week. Town's pretty dead. She goes into this shoe shop and she's looking at the shoes and she's thinking, she's trying to pick which ones. She decides on a pair, and through the rack, she sees this woman and she thinks, I know this woman. I don't know how, but I know this woman. Anyway, the woman walks around the counter and says to her, they don't suit you then, love. I wouldn't buy them. Go with the yellow ones. So my mum goes, oh, okay then. And then picks up the yellow ones and tries them on. And as she's trying them on, she thinks, that's kind of a cheeky thing to say to someone that you don't know. They don't suit you. So she looks up and around and this woman's nowhere to be seen. She goes out of the shop and looks left and right. And given the time scale of the woman saying these words and my mum going out of the shop, there's literally nowhere she could have went. But she wasn't there. Now, when she came back and gave a description of what she was wearing and how her hair was, her 2 older sisters broke down in tears and said, that was your mum. Your mum's come and gave you advice on shoes to wear for a wedding. So that was another little tidbit that she told me. The final 2 sort of anecdotes, which are rather short from my mother, was when she and my dad first moved into their first house, which was built on an old ammunition site which was bombed during the war. And it was built as a new estate over this decimated building with God knows how many deaths that took place there. Anyway, this new estate was built. They moved in, and there was a lot of mysterious activity within the house. They'd heard people running up and down the stairs, go and check, there's no one there. And the infamous story she told was of washing her hair over the bath and being slapped on the backside. And she obviously startled, jumped, ran down the stairs to give me dad a load of grief. And when she burst into the living room, my dad was in the back garden, and my elder brother, who was about 6 months old, was in his crib. So there was no one else in the house, yet she was slapped on the backside. Now, interestingly, her neighbour at the back of her house used to only do the housework of a night. So she would hoover of a night, and she would do all the noisy sort of moving things around and wiping windows and anything she could do to stay active and create a bit of noise, which is the key thing, because her partner worked nights. And as cruel as this sounds, she wanted her children to remain awake until her partner returned home, so that she wasn't alone in the house with the kids whilst they were asleep. So she would purposefully try and keep them awake by hoovering about 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night. But the reason for this was, when she was alone in the house during the day, things would just move of their own accord. If she tried to hoover around the house, the plug would be yanked out of the socket, lights would go on and off. My mother even went round one afternoon and knocked on the door, didn't get an answer, so peered through the window to see if she was about, and looked and seen that she was under the table, hiding under the table. So she knocked on the window until she got her attention, and she ran to the front door and answered it in a big panicky state and said, "Something's in the kitchen. It's been throwing pots and pans around. I didn't know what to do. I froze. I jumped under the table, and I was just going to wait here until somebody came." And when my mum and her went and checked, as she says, there was pots and pans all over the kitchen floor. So yeah, just an interesting few stories there. But as my mother also used to say, it's not the dead we should be afraid of, it's the living. And that is something I truly still believe to this day. She also said, if you want to see a ghost, you will see a ghost. Now, sadly, she's no longer with us, so I don't know exactly what she meant by that, but it probably means it's down to your belief level on what you witness and how you interpret it. But I'll leave you with that. There you go. Tatty bye.
Hello, it's me again. I've decided that I'm actually not going to include my story at the end, because you know why? You're probably sick of hearing my little voice, and it was the Connecticut doll story. Anyway, so just to remind you, in order of appearance, the link will be in the description of this episode, and the names of the podcast will be in the description of this episode. So the first podcast you heard was You Can See Me in the Dark. Then you heard They're Not Shadows, Haunted Happenstance, Southern Gothic, It's Haunted, What Now?, The Ghost Story Guys, Weekly Creep, and We Need to Talk About Ghosts. Thank you again to Chris for organising this, and please do go and check out any of those podcasts and all of those podcasts if you think that it sounds like it might be up your alley. Thank you so much for listening to this little bonus episode, and I will see you next time.